So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the science behind creativity. What is it that shows us the data that proves things in which make us more creative as individuals? Things that put us in a certain state of awareness, a certain state of being and becoming, so that we can harness the most amount of creative energy and potential that we have within us. And there's some very interesting research on this. A lot of interesting research around the idea, or at least the state of insight, having glimpses of insight, and what that relates to in relation to the brain, how that relates to certain brain functions, such like the ACC, the anterior circular cortex, which I'm going to be talking about, and what's that got to do with the brain, and what fundamentally increases the ACC, what activates the ACC more. So the ACC in the brain, it's a region of the brain which has got mostly to do with salience, erection, and having executive attention, which is the same as salience. So salience is kind of like, so there's a thing in the brain called or in the entire body, which is called the Salience Network, or the Salience System, and this is a system within the body that is kind of like the highlighter pen of the mind. It's the thing that gives executive attention to certain things that we look into, or to certain things that we look out for. And the ACC has a fundamental role in salience, has a fundamental role in perceiving things and giving attention to things. But what we need to give most attention to is glimpses of insight, because glimpses of insight through openness and sensitivity of our mind, of our thoughts, of the hunches that we receive from the outside and internal world, is what will motivate and catalyze the process of finding something creative within us, or forwarding a creative idea, or putting it into a direction which we can utilize into something practical, into something pragmatic, into something that we can flesh out into the real world. And so what makes the ACC more active? So I'll give you a quick rundown of what it is here. There is heightened activity in the brain's anterior circular cortex. The ACC plays a role in salience, executive attention, and it's part of the brain that handles error correction by detecting conflicting signals in the brain. So one thing that fundamentally makes the ACC more active, which is, as it says, detecting conflicting signals in the brain, it's the thing that also analyzes the world. It looks out for specific things in which are errors or contradictions, so that solutions can be made where there's like a hypothesis, there's a thesis and an antithesis, and there needs to be a solution. There's a black and white, and there needs to be a merging of grey, the grey itself being the solution. But what makes the ACC more active? And they found out that a good mood, in general, which is very general, but I'll get into that a bit more, a good mood increases the activity of the ACC. So why would that exactly increase the ACC? Why, and in return, why would that increase our ability to have insight? Well, when we're in a good mood, we have a higher rate of openness, and we are more sensitive, not in the kind of neurotic way, but we are more sensitive and open to the odd thoughts and nuances and hunches that we have throughout the day, which in return is basically having more insight. We have more insight about what we feel throughout the day. We're more open, we're not as judgmental, we're not as biased, we don't have cognitive dissonance to talk towards things. The good mood itself will be, in a sense, a form of patience, a resting place, something that isn't trying to get things done in a frantic way. But, very interestingly, a bad mood in the opposite direction increases our chance of analytical thinking or analytical thought. It increases the activity of being analytical, which is detrimental to creativity because it limits the brain against logic. It limits the brain against positive thought patterns, which are things in which increase our ability to have insight around things that we become more open to, and it actually enforces and manufactures a more stubborn negative, more stubborn negative thought patterns, where we might be more impatient, we become more entrenched in our cognitive biases, we become more one-sided, we become less open towards the nuances of the day. This thing is the openness towards nuance and hunches and all of these small little things that happen throughout the day. They give us the awareness of the total whole of life, the totality of what is. And having the awareness of the totality rises our awareness, which in return fuels our ability to pick up on things which can become insightful, that we can join together in a way that affirms some sort of creative output. So of course, a bad mood increases analytical thought, but you might be saying, well, thinking deeply about anything is analytical, but this form of analytical thought, when in a bad mood, is more that which limits you. So it's a lot of the time it's entrenched in the ego, and when you're entrenched in the ego, you exist by the ego itself. It's not really transparent. It has certain kind of ways of looking at the world, and then so for example, I can get very impatient if I'm in a bad mood, if I'm frustrated, if I'm annoyed. And this is relatable to anybody, is when you get in a bad mood, you stop listening to other people. You don't want to listen to what other people have to say. You just want to go your own way with what you're trying to do. You don't want to have to try and figure out, that person may be correct, because you want to be correct because you're existing in your ego. And that's what happens when we get in a bad mood, is that we kind of get, the mood itself is, we kind of get annoyed with that which is outside of us. And that's why we get in a bad mood, because our ego doesn't align with the nature of reality, or that the nature of reality is not serving the ego. And then the ego hits this wall where it's frustrated with the outside world, and then we have these stubborn negative thought patterns. We get impatient with the world, we fall into cognitive biases and all these things, and these things limit your creativity because you're restricting yourself to awareness and openness, and this actually ruins the ACC's ability to detect conflicting signals, to have a worthwhile role in salience, and to pick up on focused attention towards things in an open-minded manner. Because if you're not open-minded, then you're not going to be able to enmesh these things into something that is kind of a creative form. But this limits the ACC's ability to detect weaker signals that we pick up throughout the day, which can be those, at a later stage if we're in a good mood, those glimpses of insight. Because they're weaker signals. That's when we have a light bulb moment. A light bulb moment is when we actually give attention to that weaker signal and we allow it to blow up within our minds. And we're like, oh, I didn't realize this. Oh, I didn't think of it like this. Oh, I could do this instead of that. Those are your light bulb moments. Those are your glimpses of insight. And that is what we want to raise as much as possible. We restrict those glimpses of insight when we have negative thought patterns that restrict our ability to have the openness to view what is a field or what is within the landscape of our reality on a complete level. And not only that, but the negative thought patterns, they limit and reduce our own willingness, or the will within us to actually see these ideas through. So negative thought patterns, a bad mood, reduces our willingness to actually see these things for what they are. Because we jump into our biases and we want to think through black and white thinking. We want to see things as black and white. And when we do that, we don't see the smaller, weaker signals within our brain that we're picking up on certain elements of the day that indicate to us something that, if brooded on correctly, can be insightful if we're in a good mood and we see these things correctly. So how do we increase these positive states of mood? How do we increase them? On a scientific level, there's research on this, and the research is pretty much very efficient and very correct. So gratitude. which is, very important, the reminder of our day that we need to enforce a form of gratitude that we're existing in this kind of turbulent world and we have all of these advantages to us and we have all these benefits. But it's also to just have gratitude for the sake of existing. To be existing within this world of chaos and that humanity is giving some sort of order to it is an astonishing thing. It's absolutely crazy to see planes flying in the sky and they're not all crashing at the same time. It's crazy. But gratitude, because and this is the thing, it's like most people are in negative thinking patterns. We always look at the negative first. People always do this. And this, of course, is not good because we're restricting positive thinking patterns and we're not accessing our brain or allowing our brain to fall into positive thinking patterns before we think into the negative ones. And because of this, we're entrapping ourselves into a negative conditioning and we're not getting the refreshing and nuanced outlook and perspective of positive thinking patterns when we first adopt those to begin with the gratitude practice. But of course, by practicing gratitude, we're going to increase our state of mood, of a good mood, because we're putting ourselves in the direction of positive thinking patterns. Therefore, we need to escape our negative conditioning as much as possible. And this itself, scientifically, will put a mind shift within your brain. It will shift your mind on a very, very effective way, or on a very effective level, because you will be fueling the Salience Network, which is your attention network, the thing in your brain that picks up the stimuli of attention, or the things in which you put attention towards, with new material. You'll be because if you're always existent in the negative thinking patterns, and you're never in the positive thinking patterns, and you're always putting yourself down, and you're just calling yourself a coward and an idiot, and that you don't have the ability to do these things, and you should take them off, not do these specific activities that you want to do, and you keep putting yourself down around these things. But if you actually enforce yourself with positive thinking patterns, you're going to shift your mind with a new form of material in your attention box, in your attention mind, which, is going to be very useful for you because it's going to give you the mind shift. It's going to shift your mind towards a new way of looking at the world, a new way of thinking about yourself, a new way of seeing how things work. You're going to be adopting a more positive experience or a more positive perspective of your life into your life, and it's going to become part of your lifestyle, and then it's going to reverberate outwards into your existing day-to-day over time. But of course, the Salience Network is the region of the brain that selects stimuli which deserves our attention. So if we can fuel the Salience Network, we can then, with things of positivity and affirmation and gratitude, instead of negativity and deprecation, then we can actually fuel, and what will happen is that will start over time to extrovert itself into the world, because we're going to be acting out on those positive affirmations, and we're going to see the phenotype, or we're going to see the expression, or the because even in science and even in genetics, we have these expressions of genes, right? We have these expressions of what is built inside us. We have the genotype, which is the gene, and then you have the phenotype, which is like the environmental expression of that gene. Think of these things like genes. You're going to be putting these specific thought patterns within your mind, which will then allow them to be expressed out in an external way over time through your lifestyle and your attitude, which is going to fuel a more positive life experience, because you're allowing your Salience Network to catch on to them instead of the negative spiraling, which is keeping you going nowhere in life. So that is one way of increasing our ability to have a good mood, because we're going to be feeding the Salience Network with gratitude, with positive affirmations, and it's going to cause a mind shift, and it's going to take us out of our negative thinking patterns into positive thinking patterns, and that in itself is refreshing and nuanced and insightful, especially when we don't do that to begin with. So the next thing I want to go into is the concept of no time. So non-time is between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. It's before anything happens in the day. So this is perfect for patience, because patience is key to creativity. You need patience. You need to exist in the time of patience, which is no time at all, the existence of no time, so that you can fuel your creativity, get into a flow state. And flow states are kind of like, the perfect measure between, you get into a flow state if you are always stepping outside your comfort zone when it comes to the difficulty of doing a specific task, and then always pushing yourself towards the uncertainty of that, which is more anxiety inducing, but not stepping into anxiety itself. So it's increased work, anxiety, and then you will find an equilibrium between that, which is going to fuel you into not only development, increased value, internal value for yourself. You're going to become better at what you do, but also you're going to become more resilient. But anyway, the concept of non-time is the perfect time for creativity, because no one wakes up at this time. No one wakes up between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. The world is silent. The world is dead. The world is sleeping. And because of that, time doesn't exist. There's no deadlines. There's no pressures for you at that specific time. And of course, deadlines kill creativity. They're the biggest killer of creativity on a scientific level, because as soon as you have a deadline, you're killing your creativity, because you're going to start thinking about the pressure of why that deadline exists to begin with. So you're going to start thinking about time. You're going to start thinking about details of what you have to do in that time of the day. And that pressure is going to force and build up within you. And you're going to be thinking about all these details, which then activates the left hemisphere. Because the left hemisphere is kind of like the robotic side of your brain, in which deals more with the analytical side of life when it comes to time management and all of this. I really recommend the book Master and His Emissary. If you haven't read that book, it's a fantastic book. It goes into all of this, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and how it's influenced Western modern culture and society. But when we have deadlines, it kills our creativity. It's not the same as constraint. You can have certain amounts of constraint in your daily life which fuel your creativity, like the improvisation of a jazz player. But deadlines itself, that are time-based, they will kill your creativity, because you're activating your left hemisphere. And you're not activating the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere's all got to do with perspective, intuition, feeling, the bigger picture mostly. And the only way to really tap into that is to be a daydreamer, an effective daydreamer, an active imaginator, someone who does active imagination, who paints and sits and writes and poetically illustrates the art form within them. That is how you tap into the right hemisphere, when you are in a state of patience and a good mood. You are not going to be in a state of a good mood if you're not patient. If you're impatient, you're going to put yourself into negative thought patterns, which are going to restrict your ability to be creative. And it spirals down from there. So patience, gratitude, not putting yourself towards deadlines. But then again, the concept of non-time, when there is non-time between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m, is the perfect time for you to get into your creative zone. Because there are no people trying to, get you to get into that work ethic or into that work mindset, which is very much all left hemispheric thinking. It's purely a time for daydreaming, effective daydreaming, which I'll get into in a minute, active imagination, creativity. Because there's no, you can spend that whole 3-4 hours of 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. on simply just trying to write a beautiful sentence for a poem that you're trying to work on. And no one's going to give a shit. No one's going to put any pressure on you. There's no need to have the pressure put onto you. So that in your day is the perfect time when you should get involved in this stuff or participate in some sort of routinized activity around that specific period of time in the day. But of course, daydreaming is also a very effective thing. Daydreaming, it comes from, kids daydream a lot. And to be honest, if I was running a school, I'd have a daydreaming class where kids would daydream. I'd enforce daydreaming, because it's the same thing as active imagination. It's the same thing as remote viewing, in the sense of the Stargate CIA experiments and all of this, but more so remote association. Daydreaming, active imagination, and remote association, because what you're doing is you're allowing your subconscious mind to create remote associations that are not exactly hyper-conscious, that are at the forefront of your prefrontal cortex or anything like that, but between ideas that are sitting in your subconscious mind. And this is a beautiful thing, because that's, again, when you're in a state of daydreaming or of an active imagination, you're automatically in a good mood, because you have to be to do that. And you're also in a place where you're very much open to experience, you're open to the nuances of life, which you will then allow your subconscious mind, if you accept and fall into it, will merge these nuances and these perspectives and these orientations of different things to come together in a specific type of way where insights will occur, and that insights can then be fueled later on into a creative outlet, or that insight, or that glimpse of insight, that light bulb moment, will be the thing that you will allow to forward a motion of thought where you can create something. It could be a business idea, it could be a creative outlook, could be anything to do with any creative pursuit. And this is the beauty of making sure that we hit these fundamental first principles towards being in a state of creativity, is that we are patient, we are in a good mood, we feel the things that we need to feel to be in a good mood, so that we are open to experience, we're open to our own awareness of the world, we're open to the shadow of what exists within, we're open to the things in which we reject from ourselves, because these are all elements of the alchemical process that we turn our shit into gold. We are aware of everything. We increase our consciousness. This is even what the program is about. Increasing our consciousness. Being more aware of who we are. Becoming more of who we truly are. That's what it's all about. And using this material and using these coach calls to fuel that awareness so that we actualize ourselves more on a consistent basis in the real world. But of course, daydreaming, super effective, and it's not a bad thing. If you're a parent that says daydreaming is a bad thing, you're not a good parent. You don't understand the nature of reality. You don't understand what it means to be a human who visualizes and sees things into the world. We can create things out of nothing. When we go to school, we go to the education system, and people are completely screwed over by the simple fact that, James, are you daydreaming in the corner there? Are you looking out the window? No, sir, no, I'm just, I'm kind of confused. It's like, daydreaming is a beautiful thing, because you're visualizing what you want to create in the future, or what you want to create now. And that's the first step to creating it, is visualizing it, is to seeing it. You're halfway there, you're 50% there, you're 80% there when you do that. So if I was running a school, which I'd be totally down for, I'd love to run a school, I'd love to teach kids at some point. When I get qualified in some sense in that regard, I'd love to infuse these Jungian ways of feeling so that it can really catalyze some sort of creative pursuits for young kids. I think that'd be beautiful. But the last thing in which I want to talk about here is catalysts of constraint. So for example, the musician, the jazz musician, the way they can become creative is by putting forms of constraint. And that's not forms of pressure. Well, it's kind of forms of pressure, because, you can't produce a diamond unless there's pressure, right? But they're not the same as deadlines. A constraint, in the sense of a musician, is something like the improvisation. What does the musician need to put into place in the band so that the soloist can improvise? they need to put these pillars of constraint where you know what's in between so that you can play in between the lines of what the two constraints or the two pillars are. So, for example, a musician, it's going to be very difficult for a musician to be motivated or to be able to create anything if there's no bass line, there's no drum beat, there's no foundation of musical control for him to be able to improvise over it, to create some hooks, to create a solo, to create a chorus, to create some verses. Like, there's nothing there. So he needs something to improvise with. And that improvisation is a constraint in which catalyzes into something in which can be created later, which could be a song, which could be an album, which could be anything. And that's even the sense with anyone else doing anything creative, whether you're an artist, whether you're a poet, whether you're a dancer, or any of this stuff. Anything where you're in the body, there are things in which motivate you, in which catalyze you into a new state of being, of inspiration, a new state of becoming of inspiration, where you are in awe of something and it brings something up within you. It taps into your unconscious. It stimulates you on a deep level, which then brings these other things out from within you that you didn't even know existed until you made it so. Because a blank page can be too blank for the writer. It can just be too blank. And there needs to be, at times, you can use these things, you can use things that can motivate you poetically and any of this type of stuff. So it's like a rule of thumb, know what you want to start and how you want to end it. Everything in between is play. Cornerstones, you have pillars. This is my starting position, this is my end position. Everything in between is play. Everything else in between is room for creativity, room for stacking and creating the Jacob's ladder that goes all the way to heaven. Who knows? It could be anything, it could be the place where you can create whatever you want. If you're writing an article, you're writing a blog post, are you writing anything like this? Are you writing a book? These things are your start and end pillars, your cornerstones, to be able to work in between them. And it's the pressure of time, the pressure for time, more likely kills creativity more so than any other forms of deadline, of constraint. Of course, modern world is a pressure cooker for time. Everything is a pressure cooker for time. And that's why that's why we're entrapping our souls into these identities, these persona identities of left hemispheric thinking, where we're brooding, we're being all analytical in these jobs, or trying to search out for jobs in certain job markets, and we're restricting our soul, and then we're getting onto antidepressants and we're fueling our body with these psychoactive drugs, when really it's a compensation of the muse inside of us not being able to be expressed outwards, because the muse is the thing that sits on your shoulder, just like how the right hemisphere sits on your right side of your brain, near your shoulder. It's the same thing. It's the expression of this that is being restrained by the modern world being a pressure cooker for time, where time is the thing that restricts our ability to be present and to be vitalized by our own presence, where we can sit and simply imagine the world that we could live in with the abundance of our own creativity that isn't restricted with or against time. If we could be in a position like that, then with fulfilling all the principles of what makes a good mood, gratitude, enforcing gratitude, solitude, grace, humility, all of these things, patience, and in understanding the science behind that, we can then fuel ourselves towards those pursuits that can become more creative for us. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you feel like it resonated with you on a level of magnitude, and you feel like procrastination is also something that you are dealing with, and you're always following and falling down a convenient path that is always easier and never actually good for you, and you want to break the cycles of procrastination that you're constantly in, and you want to stop giving yourself away to these easy, simple pleasures that don't fulfill you, and you want to work on developing your own decentralized freedom when it comes to building good habits for yourself, then sign up for a free consultation call down below with me, and we can talk about the methods and the techniques that you will need to know so that you can develop those aspects of yourself to reach a greater, higher potential. So with that said, make sure to click on the link in the description below, and I look forward to talking to you very soon.